Today we're going to be checking out one of the rewards for hitting 99 Slayer, that being the Personal Slayer Dungeon. What is it, how do you get there, and how are we going to use it? To get to the Personal Slayer Dungeon, housed in the Sunken Pyramid, you want to start in Menethos and head to the Ports District. Once in the Ports District, head all the way north to Portmaster Kaggs and ask him to take you to the Sunken Pyramid. Once there, just enter the pyramid. In the entrance to the Sunken Pyramid, there are two main things of note. There's a big chest, and the ghost of a Slayer Master. Talking to the Slayer Master, they will sell you on the idea of becoming a Slayer Master yourself and give you the Slayer Codex, or the Slayer Dex for short. Our goal is now to travel across the land, search far and wide, and catch all of the Slayer monster souls in these little pocket dimension devices, called Ushabtis. Unfortunately, we can't yet use them to battle other players with, but maybe that's a future update. Before we head out on our catching spree, however, we first need to rack up some Slayer points. This is because Ushabtis cost Slayer points, and there's also an ability you can buy from Slayer Masters that allows you to move monsters around your personal Slayer dungeon, which costs 1,000 more points. So I'm going to aim for about 2,000 Slayer points, that should do us quite nicely. For this, I'm going to use the Jacqueline Slayer point boosting method, and I'm basically just going to cover any tasks that I think are interesting along the way. And the first task of interest is a task of Moss Golems. This is a task that's been quite affected by the Animate Dead changes, which nerfed Animate Dead against smaller hits. So when you're getting hit by a bunch of Moss Golems, Animate Dead is now less effective. However, I found it to still be good enough to be able to do this task pretty safely. Next up is Greater Demons, or more specifically Greater Demon Berserkers. This task has a bit of infamy for being really good Slayer XP, however they did make one nerf to it. They've made Berserkers and Ashlords now count as 8 Greater Demons on your task instead of 1. So while each task does only last 1/8 the number of kills, I still think they're worth doing because they give a ton of XP. We are getting 50k XP drops using a Scrimshaw of Sacrifice. And most of the rest of my tasks were stuff like Lava Strike Worms and Ripper Demons, which, while good tasks, don't particularly have anything of note other than just being good profit. Now we've got some Slayer points farmed up, let's put them to use. We're going to be picking up the upgrade to move monsters around rooms, and we're also going to be picking up 30 more Ushabtis. So, our next goal is to capture at least 50 different monster souls. This will unlock the teleport option on the Slayer Codex, which will allow us to teleport to our personal Slayer dungeon nice and quickly. To know what 50 souls to go after, we first need to understand the catch mechanics. If you care about all the nitty-gritty of the capture details, the wiki has a great overview of it, as well as a calculator for figuring out your own catch rates. Personally, I'm going to be focusing on one factor, and that is Slayer level. Each monster has a Slayer level, and the greater the difference in your favour between your Slayer level and theirs, the better your catch rate. So we want to go and capture everything that has a Slayer level of 1. First, we headed to the Ardoin Zoo and captured ourselves a monkey soul. And we followed this up by going to Lumbridge to get hold of a goblin, as well as a cow, a chicken. Then going down into the catacombs, we got a spider, as well as a rat, and a bat. And we also grabbed a zombie and a skeleton while we were down here. Heading back up to the surface, we grabbed the scorpion from Alcarid, a wolf from White Wolf Mountain, and then we dove into Tavali Dungeon to pick ourselves up a ghost, as well as a blue dragon. It's worth noting for the chromatic dragons, all the variants count, so you can just kill the baby dragons if you want to. We also went and picked up a black demon, as well as a hellhound, before pulling a stupid and dying to a black dragon. We picked things back up with a bear soul, should probably put some shoes on, and then it was into our next dungeon, the Brimhaven dungeon, where we started off with a steel dragon. And this time I remembered to bring an anti-fire so I didn't get barbecued, which was also useful for getting the Iron Dragon, and the Bronze Dragon. And then for an unlikely duo, the Fire Giant and the Moss Giant, who for some reason are just hanging out right next to each other. But then it was on to the next dragon, the Red Dragon, as well as the next demon, the Greater Demon. And the final monster to pick up in the Brimhaven dungeon is the dog. So now we'll just finish off our first inventory by going and picking up a Hill Giant, and then finally getting a Troll. So with our first 26 souls collected, we returned to our Slayer dungeon and dropped them in the chest. Putting them in this chest means you can't use them in the actual dungeon itself, however we're just here to collect the souls from these ones. These 26 plus the 1 tormented demon I actually got for a Slayer task earlier, puts us up to a count of 27, so we just need to get 23 more. Partway through this catching spree, I realized that some mobs were taking a bit longer to catch than others despite both having a Slayer level requirement of 1 or close to it. It turns out there's actually adjusted Slayer levels, so some mobs that have a requirement of Slayer level 1 to kill actually have an adjusted Slayer level of 40 or 50, so they take quite a bit longer to catch than others. And there's even an instance of the opposite case where a mob that requires 50 Slayer to kill actually has an adjusted Slayer level of 1. For now, let's hit some music while we catch the rest of these souls.
Something's wrong, I feel it circling like vultures round my brain. Couldn't see the danger in your eyes. Draw me in, got me spinning now like water to a drain. You were perfect till I realized you hadn't shown your face. You sing a pretty song to drag my heart along, a siren serenade. You're ringing out your prey. Your love's a wreck and you know it's wrong. I was deaf to the ringing bells, wanting me to break, deafened by the siren's soothing lies. I can't leave, I am in too deep, been sinking for a while, prisoner to the same thing I despise, devoted to a fake. You sing a pretty song to drag my heart along, a siren serenade. You're ringing out your prey. Your love's a wreck and you know it's wrong. It's over.
And there we go. We can now teleport to the sunken pyramid because we have collected 50 monsters. Now, I do eventually want to go for 169 out of 169 here. However, it doesn't make much sense to do that without 120 Slayer, because first of all, I can't actually kill every monster that we need to kill. And also, at 120 Slayer, you get way better chance of capturing souls. So the higher level ones that would currently take me a really long time to do off task will be much quicker. So the next step is to get 120 Slayer. But before we do that, let's talk about how we're going to be using the Slayer dungeon. The first room we're going to cover is the small room. This is typically used to farm 5 of the same mob, and since the loot area changes that give us the same area loot as mobile, you can actually loot this entire room from the center now. The first farm I'm going to mention here is one that's primarily useful for Iron Men who are going for Ascension crossbows. That is, filling the room with 5 Capsarius and using the Equilibrium aura with something like a Decimation, and Legacy mode to be able to one-shot the Capsarius. This gives you about 1200 Capsarius kills an hour, I believe. And if you're an Iron Man going for Ascension crossbows, you're going to be here many hours. Some other examples of creatures that are good to put in the small room are Manifest or Truthful Shadows for elite clue farming. Muspers and Crystal Shapeshifters make them better tasks than they would otherwise be, and Spiritual Warriors or Mages are great for alchebal farming. And these are just a handful of the options available. While the small room is typically used for fighting more of a monster, the 2 larger rooms are counterintuitively usually used for fighting fewer of monsters. Examples of these are Tormented Demons, Ripper Demons, Camel Warriors, Hydrix Dragons, and Calgarian Demons, where you really want to fight just 1 or 2 of them at a time, and taking advantage of the fast respawn rate in the dungeon is way more advantageous than just being swarmed by them. As for what I'm going to be using my Slayer dungeon for, I think I'm going to use the small room for Crystal Shapeshifters, otherwise I probably won't ever want to do that task. As for the large rooms, I'll just slowly build up a collection of annoying mobs and just rotate those in and out. The Slayer dungeon is typically overlooked as a reward nowadays, but I'm going to be making quite a bit of use of it on the way to 120 Slayer. And on the note of 120 Slayer, that is my next goal, and unsurprisingly, that's going to take me a bit more than 2 weeks, especially with how much attention I'm currently putting into Path of the Titans. As such, I've made the decision to make this series as an ad hoc basis. I'm basically going to do an episode as and when I achieve a goal that I would normally be working towards anyway, rather than setting goals I'm not particularly interested in just to meet a video deadline. However, for consistent content, there is always Path of the Titans, which comes out every weekend. But for now, that's going to be wrapping us up for this video. If you got to this part of the video, I'm going to assume you liked it. If so, you know what to do. And as always, I hope everyone has a wonderful week, and I'll catch you again next time.